We get that from dad who says, go on, you could do it. Let's go, get in gear. It can be stern. It can be issued simply as a directive. But behind it all is you can. You can. If that has not been modeled for us and the development of our internal masculine, if you will, like plants, these are things that were never watered. And so they just didn't grow.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. Today, we are going to talk about absent fathers. This is simply a reality in the world, and there are so many ways for a father to be absent. He may have had premature death and be absent in that way, or there could be illness, demanding work, which takes the father away on long trips, or his attention is simply in other places rather than on a particular child. And there may be just inability, personal inability to provide for a child all that he or she needs. Interestingly enough, Jung had an absent father. He says in his memoir, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he says, father meant reliability and powerlessness. That's the handicap I started off with. Later, these early impressions were revised. I've trusted men friends and been disappointed by them, and I've mistrusted women and was not disappointed. So here is one of our primary early sources of relationship and connection, both mother and father. But today, and we'll give equal time to mother later, but today let's think about the absent father.
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots of different ways to come at this, but just to frame it up, really broadly, if you think about the research that sociologists and anthropologists have done on what is the role of fathers. And it is pretty clear, cross-culturally that fathers play a different role in acculturating the young. Mothers tend to get down on the kids' level and look them in the eye and kind of engage in motherese, where, they may speak in a kind of sing-song way or kind of a baby talk way. We might kind of modulate our vocabulary so that we're speaking more at their level. Fathers don't tend to do that. One of the role of the father, I want to say archetypally, is to challenge the child. So the father in general, fathers do not change their vocabulary when they talk to kids. They don't baby talk them. There's an opportunity for the kid to feel like he or she is being asked to kind of play up to dad's level. I remember when my kids were little, my idea of spending time with my kids is, well, what would you like to do today? We could go to the zoo. We could go to the playground. And, I'd go off and spend the day maybe at Jungian training and leave them with the kids. And I'd come home, I'd say, well, what'd you do? And he'd say, oh, I took them to Home Depot. And I'd be really angry. I was like, what? You didn't take them somewhere where they could have fun and enrich their minds. But I was wrong, because that's the role of the dad, right? You're going to go to Home Depot with me. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to the world of adults. you know? And so that is a kind of a classic role of the dad, is to challenge a little bit. And when I think about, a really kind of great dad, one of the images that comes to mind is Laura Ingalls Wilder father. If you read those wonderful books by Laura Ingalls Wilder about her life growing up, she had a very close relationship with her dad who doted on her a little bit and taught her all kinds of things. But he was present, but he was kind of introducing her to the world, and in a way that was loving, but also kind of challenging. This is this great image of the father. But then you get industrialization, and fathers and mothers, by the way, are often out for long hours working away from the home. So we're living in, if we're living in a kind of agricultural existence, we're near our fathers a lot. But then our fathers in industrial modern society, our father leaves the house often early in the morning and doesn't come back until late at night. I remember when my kids were little, I used to realize that my husband never saw them when they were out of pajamas, because he would leave super early in the morning. And it's like they didn't see daddy very much, except on weekends. So that in and of itself separates us from the father. And then I think the world of the father now, because it might be work outside the home, it's very different from the world maybe of mom and kids, depending on what mom does. It's certainly different from the realm of the kids. And so then I think a lot of us have a wound where we grew up with a father who was absent merely by virtue of the fact that his world was so different than ours. And he may have come home after, this was true for my dad, come home from a long day of work and not had a lot of energy or bandwidth left over to kind of really engage. And Jon Kabat-Zinn talks about this. And he talks about a river of underground grief that a lot of us feel for the kind of fathering that we missed.
Yeah, I really agree with these points that you've made, and that in our modern world, the father is often out all day, comes home tired.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about the father's role, throughout history, one where he provides, usually men who went out hunting and fishing,
Mm-hmm.
and the women were in an enclave, hopefully a community of children and other kinds of domestic activities. But the father's job is also to provide in the way of teaching. We would not have survived as a species if fathers had not had an active role in teaching sons primarily how to hunt and fish, how to make tools, how to do all of those kinds of sustaining things. Fathers had to do that, and they don't. They don't come home and teach their sons skills in engineering, or
some of them come home and teach them how to throw a baseball or
yes, exactly,
or football, and that's important, right?
Yeah. But fathers introduce kids to the world,
Mm-hmm.
and provide structure, provide discipline and instruction, and most of all, take an interest. They see little John and little Julie as people and find them of interest and worth spending time with, whether it's throwing a baseball,
Mm-hmm.
or telling that 10-year-old, this is from my era, of, I know it's raining, get on your bike, deliver the papers. Get out there, go do it. They may help that kid to wrap the papers up in plastic, but move it. Out you go. It's a discipline, but it's also encouragement of, you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
You can surmount this challenge. Whereas the father who's tired, or what Jung said about his father of a hollowness, when nothing is there, It leaves a void, a vacuum, a kind of nothingness, contactlessness that will make the child search for that elsewhere. Jung found it in all his psychological searches of archetypes, fairy tales, myths, all of those kinds of things. He found the structure, the ordering principle, and the guidance.
And the first place he found it, perhaps, was through projection, as many of us do, in his colleague and mentor, Freud.
And we know that because he referred to Freud as a father
Mm-hmm.
and wrote letters saying, I need your guidance. Freud was about 25 years older than Jung. So he was the perfect father image for Jung to receive what he hadn't received from his own father.
Mm-hmm. I do want to say that we're talking a lot about the role of fathers, and some of this has some basis in biology, and of course some of it's cultural as well. It is possible for that kind of father energy to be carried by a woman as much as a man, right? Sometimes it's mom who says, "Come on, get out the door," even though it's raining. I think I sometimes played that role with my kids a little bit too. So we're not trying to be prescriptive here that this is what men should do and this is what women should do. We're just kind of talking about the general patterns. But to go back to the idea of an absent father, what do you do if your father literally isn't there, or he comes home and is very, very tired and sort of just not available? And like you said, Deb, he doesn't notice you. He doesn't take an interest in you. Or he's aloof or preoccupied, or seems like he's not interested in you because you don't measure up. So there's that kind of that yearning that develops on the part of the child. And I also want to say that in particular, the absent father tends to leave a child to the mercy of either a devouring mother, or sometimes the father abandons the child, an absent father abandons child to the mercy of the culture. In other words, there's a protective function that fathers are supposed to play. So it might be that, what do you mean you're talking to strangers on the internet? Give me that iPad right now, That's good father energy. And the father says, "Oh, well, what are you going to do these days?" That's a kind of absence.
Yes, absence and a powerlessness. But I want to go back to the idea of being seen, having a father who takes an interest versus that absence, which is, well, I don't know. I mean, whatever he does or whatever she does, or to not be seen, to not have a father take an interest is simply devastating. And Donald Winnicott, who is a British analyst, talked about the devastation of not being found. If you're not of interest, talk to me. Tell me about, where you were, where you're going, of just you yourself are worth my time, worth my attention. I want to hear and see you as a person. It's simply devastating. The person that should be guiding, teaching, protecting, doesn't find you, his own offspring, worth expending that kind of energy on. Really does a job on self-esteem. And as you said, Lisa, then you're turned over to the collective.
Mhm.
So then what do you get? A kid who hangs with peers. So if they're all 10-year-olds, how much does one 10-year-old know more than another, or a 15-year-old, or a 25-year-old?
Mhm.
They're turned over to a much less mature, valuable, and connecting source. to get the relational needs met.
So, speaking of fathers who didn't really take an interest in their children, that apparently is true for Carl Jung. And we're looking in Deirdre Baer's wonderful biography, and I'm just going to read something from it. So, Carl Jung had one son named Franz, and then he had, what is it, 4 other children who were all girls. Is that right? Okay. So this is what Franz says. Can you imagine living, this is about his mother. Can you imagine living with a man who left you with full responsibility for his house and his children while he passed the time playing their games or being in that same house with another woman, referring, of course, to Toni Wolff? And then Franz also told the poignant story of a rare occasion when Jung took his 4 older children sailing and bought them sweets when they docked at a village on the lake. When we got home, Marianne ran across the lawn to Mother and cried, "Just look, Franz's father bought me a little cake." Now, Marianne's father was Carl Jung, but she didn't even recognize that that was her father. She thought of him as Franz's father. And then, of course, Mother immediately said, "Now look, Marianne, you must understand that Franz's father is your father too." But boy, does that tell you something about Jung's relationship with his children and how he didn't really notice them.
Isn't there such a poignant sadness
Mm-hmm.
that you wouldn't recognize your own father as this is my father, our father. It's Franz's father. And, and I recall a little girl who was going to be 4, and she was so excited. Birthday party's coming up, and she said, "And even my father's going to be there."
Wow.
So I'm circling back to the importance of simply paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's not magic. It's not some elusive personal quality that is hard to define. Taking an interest and seeing his daughter Agatha or Marianne or Goethe as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing who that person is.
I mean, we can wonder about, why this happens. And I want to say that, the purpose of the discussion is not to demonize men or demonize fathers, but partly I think what we're saying is the nature of the culture kind of works against fathers having this kind of contact with kids. And perhaps especially in previous generations, I think things are a little better now. Now it used to be that there was no such thing as paternity leave. Men didn't take off time to take care of babies. I remember when I gave birth, I think my husband had a week off or something, and it's like, oh, okay. So we're recognizing now more and more how important fathers are, and there are structural things in the culture that are supporting this kind of contact, even culturally. I mean, just in terms of social norms, it used to be that men that took care of babies were kind of looked askance and considered sissies or what was wrong with you. But there's much more support these days for fathers being really involved. And that's good for everybody. It's good for fathers too, because it's so rewarding and enjoyable to have a relationship with your kids. But if we grew up with an absent father, what kind of effect does that have on our psyche?
Well, both of us turned back to Linda Leonard, who has written a number of books about women, and one of her major books is The Wounded Woman. And in that book, of course, she pays a very, very great deal of attention to what can happen to daughters of absent fathers and the kinds of wounding that daughters can suffer. Trying to get father's attention, earning his love by meeting his expectations. That's what I did. I was good at swimming and He would come to swim meets, and the gratification that you get from a kid who's doing something special, getting good grades, not being in any trouble, all the rest of that kind of thing, it can undermine self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
That if my father doesn't think that I can do it or doesn't even really pay attention to me, why would I think I could do really well out there in the world? We can rebel. We can become the father's sort of love object by being very conforming, present, and ego gratifying for the father. One way or another, wounds are incurred that can be huge governing forces in future relationships for a young woman or an older woman with finding a life partner. If the first man in your life did not really pay attention, take an interest, show up, and be present, well, we can imagine that that is going to influence future relationships with the opposite sex or same sex, where, some of this that Linda Leonard writes about for women and the daughters also, of course, applies to men who can be equally wounded
Mm-hmm.
by an absent father.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think if you have an absent father as a man too, there's a way that you haven't been shown how to be a man.
Yeah.
You haven't been shown how to be a father. I want to say, so you brought up intimate relationships. That's obviously an important one. Another one is the father and the father complex, the father archetype can really govern, especially a woman's relationship to her creativity. So being able to express yourself creatively, to get out in the world for men and women, the principle of the sort of phallic striving in the world to go out and make a career, make a name for yourself. That is very much related to one's relationship with the father. And if there's a father wound there, if the father was absent or uninterested or dismissive, that, like you said, Deb, can undermine your sense of worthiness, I want to say. There's a kind of bedrock, an emotional bedrock of like never good enough. I think it has to do, there's a sort of anxiety or insecurity around, am I good enough? Can I do the thing out in the world? Where it has a little different quality with a mother wound. If the mother's absent, that has a slightly different feel to it. But the father, it often has to do with outer world achievement, accomplishment, creativity, self-expression, and particularly in the case of a woman finding a good love relationship with a member of the opposite sex.
I was thinking I wanted to fold aggression into that. As a corollary, it takes aggression to get out into the world. Proactive, sometimes real force of, I am going to do this thing. I am going to try out for that part in the class play. I am going to find out about college scholarships or, any of those things that take us out into the world and have some real oomph and push and our own, if you will, phallic energy of that we get that from dad who says, go on, you could do it. Let's go, get in gear. It can be stern. It can be issued simply as a directive. But behind it all is you can. You can. Now go do it. So if that has not been modeled for us and the development of our internal masculine, if you will, that we all have all these opposites inside us, and they're often very culturally modeled as reflections of an archetypal reality by our parents. And these are the things you are and can do and have within you. And these are the things that were never like plants. These are things that were never watered.
Yeah.
And so they just didn't grow.
So I have a good father story. When I lived in New York, I used to like to, this was, some time ago, I used to like to rollerblade around the Central Park Loop. And if you've ever done that, you'll know that the very top of the park is hilly. So there's a cut through where you can miss the hill. And of course, it's a little scary being on rollerblades going down a sustained hill because you have to be able to stop yourself or slow yourself down. So I used to do this loop with my friend Suzanne, and I would usually say, I'm going to take the cut off. I don't want to do the top part of the loop. And one day we got to that point, and she said, Lise, she said, my dad always said to me, face your fears. And I thought, wow, I don't think anyone had ever said that to me before. Face your fears. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And I did it, and I didn't break my leg or suffer a concussion or anything like that. I got down just fine. And after that, I always did the top part of the loop. But I thought my friend was very fortunate to have a dad who said to her, face your fears. And that's exactly the kind of thing that a father does, right? Is face your fears.
And I'm paying attention to the fact that oftentimes those fatherly kinds of things are to do it,
Hmm.
to try it, to work for it, to prepare for it, to commit to it, to go about it in an organized and steady way. That's the father energy often rather than, well, no, I think you should stay home. Don't do it.
Hmm.
Unless it comes in the guise of protectiveness, which is also has its positive side of you're not going out tonight. It's a school night. You get back in here. You're going nowhere.
But I want to go back to what I said before too about how sometimes it's mom who plays that role. And in my family, I think that I mean, my husband definitely has some of that, but I have a lot of it too. I have a lot of that sort of phallic energy. And I can remember my daughter wanted to do something very frightening when she was 12. She wanted to leave us and go live in France with another family through this program. And my husband was really, really scared. And he really didn't want to let her go. And I remember where I was sitting when we had the conversation, and I just knew my agenda was to get him to say yes. I didn't strong arm him, but I was like, I got to sit down. I got to listen to what he's saying and really understand his concerns, and then let him know that I think we should say yes anyway. And we did. And it was like an incredible experience, of course. But I was the one saying, let's let her do it. So sometimes it's mom and sometimes it's dad. But in general, we think of that as kind of like father energy from an archetypal standpoint, right?
And so you're making the point that each of us has both of those sort of kind of colloquial masculine and
Yes.
feminine qualities in each of us. But, I also know kids, including my own, of, I can say, no, you're not doing that, or come in here. My husband would say, all right, that's enough. Get upstairs and take a bath.
I can just imagine Jamie saying that.
And then it would happen in a way. I mean, because mom is always telling you what to do, what not to do, taking you places, buying you sneakers, doesn't have quite the same authoritative impact
Right.
that, when dad says, that's it, kids.
Yep. Yeah. I want to move us into sort of a slightly different version of this topic. And we mentioned absent fathers very particularly because the absent father is a little bit different than the domineering father, although, there's some overlap there. The dad who's really, really cruel, or what we might think of more as the negative father. And we do have an episode on the negative father. Maybe the absent father is like a subset of the negative father, but has a particular quality to it. But I want to say that the absent father, both archetypally and in reality, is often paired with an abusive mother. Whenever there's abuse in a two-parent household, it's always the case that, well, usually there's one parent who is more of the abuser, the aggressor. But if that's the case, there's often another parent that's allowing it to happen. And if you've had a parent who's abusive, oftentimes you'll come into therapy and you'll do a lot of work around that. And eventually you'll get to the other parent. And that wound is almost deeper sometimes, because let's say that you had a mother who was abusive, who was dangerous, who was threatening, whether it was physical or emotional, or she was cold or whatever. Eventually you get to, why didn't dad stop her? Why didn't he say something? Why didn't he do something? And sometimes there's a very good reason for it, or it's the dad is sort of trying to do his best. Just the other way around too. Sometimes mom is doing her best to protect the kids, but it's limited. But usually there's it's an almost deeper sense of betrayal, because this was the good parent. This was the parent who didn't beat the shit out of you. But then you realize, why did they let it happen?
Yes.
Where were they?
And we have archetypal precedents in fairy tales for this. I've always wondered, where the heck was Cinderella's father? I don't know. Was he busy in his office? Was he running a kingdom? But he was indifferent.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't show up. He was passive, couldn't take a stand. Snow White's father, I'm putting him in the same category. I love how the evil queen in Snow White is always portrayed. I mean, you really can't miss it. You just can't miss it. And dad is doing something somewhere, but doesn't appear on the scene. In the tale of Beauty and the Beast, dad brings home rich gifts from his trip away for two sisters. All Beauty wanted was a white rose. The father steals it and brings it to her, and when it turns out that the price for the theft is going back to the middle of the forest where the beast and his castle live.
Mm-hmm.
Beauty's father, when she says, no, I'll go, says, well, okay, honey. And that there's a passivity, an absence of presence that we would expect a father to display. Then there are lots of fairy tales of fathers who do the wrong thing. But if we just stick with those,
Right.
it's an interesting validation of this as a pattern.
Yeah. And I want to bring up another fairy tale. It's a really dark one called The Juniper Tree. And in it, a man marries a woman and he has this beautiful little boy, but then that mother dies. And so he marries again. So there's a stepmother. And by that woman, he has a daughter. But the stepmother hates the little boy, and eventually she kills them. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of this part of the story. Then the mother took the little boy and chopped him in pieces, put him into the pot, and cooked him into stew. But Marlene, his sister, stood by crying, and all her tears fell into the pot, and they did not need any salt. Then the father came home and sat down at the table and said, "Where is my son?" And the mother served up a large dish of stew, and Marlene cried and could not stop. Then the father said again, "Where is my son?" "Oh," said the mother, "he's gone across the country to his mother's great uncle. He will stay there a while." "What is he doing there?" "He did not even say goodbye." "Oh, he wanted to go and asked me if he could stay 6 weeks. He will be well taken care of there." "Oh," said the man, "I am unhappy. It isn't right. He should have said goodbye to me." With that, he began to eat, saying, "Marlene, why are you crying? Your brother will certainly come back." I mean, it's a very disturbing fairy tale and a very poignant fairy tale. But that scene is so psychologically poignant because, the father sort of knows something's wrong. Where's my son? But then he begins to eat. He doesn't let himself know what's right in front of him. And a lot of times when we have a configuration like this, where let's say the mother is very abusive, there is a way that the father numbs himself to the reality of what's going on. And even though a part of him may say, where's my son? He's reaching for a spoon at the same time.
There is a profound sadness. And of course, I'm thinking about fairy tales do not shy away from depicting these dynamics in incredibly shocking ways.
Mm-hmm.
Versus in Cinderella and in Snow White in particular, father's never even appears in the tale. It's simply not there. So there may be something here that our heritage of all these stories is pointing to about the importance of relatedness, of noticing, which goes back to what I was thinking about before, about paying attention, of just be present and notice. And I'm also aware of how often, probably in our very beginnings, it was men who were out fishing and hunting and away more. And women can be just as difficult. Mothers have all of their archetypal proclivities and difficulties. We all know about the dangerous, difficult, cruel stepmother.
Mm-hmm.
It is harder to notice what's not there. So one thing seems to be in the background for fathers, whereas mothers are always in the foreground, or stepmothers being the ones who are cruel. And then what do we do when we grow up and we don't know what we don't know? We don't know that it's missing. We can recognize the presence of the things that were difficult or things that felt unfair, things that felt cruel, but it's harder to notice something that was never really there at all.
Yes, the thing that wasn't there, or the way we feel betrayed, because like the father in the juniper tree, he could have known and he chose not to. Or he knew and he didn't stand up to her, because that's in the fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel. It's the mother who wants to leave the kids in the forest, and the father says, "Oh, really? Do we gotta?" And she's like, "Husband, listen to me." So they leave, and the kids find their way home, and the father's overjoyed to see them. But then he lets her be talked into doing it again, and this time the kids stay in the forest. And I'm going to tell you that I have worked with plenty of people who had a cruel or oppressive in some way, or kind of narcissistic mother, where dad was a basically good guy, but never stood up. I'm thinking I could think of half a dozen clinical cases vignettes right now that I could share.
I can too.
Yeah, and sometimes it's little things, but it's just like, "Oh, you suck. You put yourself in service to her at some point, and you are not going to contravene her wishes, even if that means sacrificing me, your child." There's also sort of a similar motif in Rapunzel. The mother really wants the rampion, and the witch catches the man, says, "Okay, I'll go steal you some." When she's pregnant, she's having this craving for this herb, but he steals it from the witch's garden, and the witch says, "You owe me your firstborn child." So again, it's like the child gets sacrificed and the father lets it happen.
Well, I'm thinking about looking at this from the archetypal perspective of maybe the negative animus in the proverbial wicked stepmother. and that the positive side, or at least,
Mm-hmm.
The uncruel side, shows up in the father. And so what has happened, might we imagine, to Hansel and Gretel's father, or Rapunzel's father, or Cinderella and Snow White's, that they can't stand up to this aspect of the feminine
Mm-hmm.
that shows such aggression and such force and such harmfulness that we can associate with the negative masculine. And we talk about negative animus. What's missing here? What are we looking at when we see in these stories the father who can't say, no, we're not leading the kids out into the middle of the woods when it's dark out.
Mm-hmm. One part of my work over the past number of years has been kind of consulting with families whose teenage or young adult kids have really kind of gone down a dark road. And it's very individual, it's very unique. These stories are all different, and yet there are some patterns. And so one of these patterns is that mom calls me and she's very, 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 very worried and she wants my advice. And this is not always true, but it's it's pretty often true that dad is not that concerned. He thinks the kid's going to be fine. He kind of minimizes the danger. He may even kind of be a little bit dismissive or disparaging of how spun up mom is about this. And it's an interesting parallel to some of these stories where in this case the kid may not being preyed upon by the mom, but may be preyed upon by something in the culture, kind of darker forces in the culture. And mom is like, what are we going to do? And sometimes in a way that is itself, I'm going to say, as a shorthand, her worry may be, let's just say her worry may not be adaptive. But a lot of times, she's tracking something. And it's dad who's kind of absent, who's a little bit weak or passive, or just says, well, what are we going to do? What, we can't do anything about it.
And it's not that big a deal.
Not that big a deal. You're annoying me because you're always talking about this thing. So it's interesting to see that these fairy tale patterns do exist out in the world, not 100% of the time. And I've certainly seen the case where it's the dad who sails in, who's really worried, that kind of protectiveness. So it is very unique. I don't want to say that it's always the same thing.
But we do see these patterns. And of course, what
Yeah.
we will get to next is the devouring or the terrible mother. But the pattern does seem to be for fathering energy to be passive, withdrawn, and inactive, and mothering energy in its negative aspect is overt, cruel, punitive, or sometimes making more of something than it needs to be made. No, this is a terrible problem. And most people looking in would say, well, it's not really that big a problem.
Right. I mean, a mother's, and we'll talk about this more in the upcoming episode on devouring mothers, but I think there's a way that a mother's anxiety can be devouring.
Yeah. That puts a point right on it, that the anxiety and the presence of mom hovering, noticing, reacting, and being the imperfect human that most of us are, is not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And the proactive efforts are also, not really to good effect, not well considered. So each side of this negative parental kind of archetypal constellation has its effect, but the pattern is there of the overall tendency for negative father to withdraw
Yeah.
or to be domineering and cruel. So we haven't included that. But this withdrawing,
Right. It's one version.
one version versus the tendency to be overly present in mother.
I do just want to sort of throw up the mirror example, which happens, right? Where let's say dad is sexually abusing the daughter and mom just looks the other way and mom doesn't see it. Now that's kind of the mirror version, I think, of maybe what's depicted in a fairy tale like the juniper tree. It's like mom's like, I'm not going to see it. And again, if you're that kid, and you grow up to be an adult, the first thing you process is your incredible rage at your father for doing that. And eventually you get to like, and where the heck was mom? But it does go to this quality of absence, that we see in so many of these fairy tales, either because the dad is just not in the picture or mom is doing terrible, terrible things. And what's dad doing? Or again, in these fairy tales like Rumpelstiltskin or the Singing Springing Lark or Beauty and the Beast or the story of Iphigenia, where dad is like, you're expendable. Let me, the myth of Iphigenia, of course, where he sacrifices his daughter in order to get favorable winds at the beginning of the Trojan War. So there are lots of different sort of iterations of this.
Yeah. I think I want to put in a plug for fathers in our collective, that of people that I have worked with, either individually or as couples, when there is a divorce. Whew. It is our culture makes it difficult for men to stay in touch with kids.
Oh my God, yes.
It's so typical in, my limited exposure to this, but for the father to have every other weekend and then maybe one night a week, depending on geographic distance and all of that kind of thing, of without the support of home and maybe a dinner on the table, a container, a structure, dad has to come up with stuff to do with the kids all weekend when it's his weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Child support payments can be onerous for fathers. When children are born, there's paternity leave is more commonplace now, but it's not the same amount as what women get.
Well, I think it's changing. I think now it's more common that men get the same amount. Yes, it's now called family leave. And I believe that men can take the same amount, which is great. But this is totally new, right? Like, it doesn't feel like that long ago that I had kids. And it was like I said, I think my husband got a week, which is nothing. But you're so right, Deb. I remember I worked with a lot of men. I worked with Vietnam vets early in my career. And of course, they were all men, essentially. And there was such heartbreak over the way that many of them had been separated from their children through divorce. And I'm not saying that these men were saints and hadn't done anything wrong, but it had been, I think there were realities about the legal system and assumptions made about fathers that meant that it had been pretty easy for the mothers to get either full custody or in some cases kind of the father had sort of minimal custody, like you're saying. Now, again, fortunately, I think it's changed a little bit. It's more common for parents to have 50-50 custody, but that's relatively recently. And I think fathers have been considered less important than mothers in many ways. And there has been a great deal, I think, of heartbreak around that, both for the children and for the fathers. And I think mothers who are responsible, who get divorced, understand that it's really important to cultivate that relationship with dad and not to undermine that. And it's difficult because you may be very angry at your former spouse. And I've worked with tons of people in that situation, and a lot of people really, really try to do their best to to make sure that that relationship stays strong. And it can be hard.
And I think also today, you just mentioned Vietnam vets. The preponderance of people who go to war are still men.
Mm-hmm.
The 80-hour-a-week jobs that some men have, or working 2 jobs, there still are so many trends that structurally distance men from their children. I know my father, when he came home from work, was exhausted. He was a doctor. He'd been working all day long, first at the hospital, and then he had clinic hours. And he came home and he put on headphones and he had a recliner chair and
Wow.
he listened to music.
Oh my gosh.
Partly looking back on it, I mean, is it realistic to expect any number of very, very hardworking guys, mothers too, absolutely mothers too, to come bounding in the door at 6:30 and want to play Uno with their kids?
It's like the last thing you want to do.
So I'm not wanting at all to minimize the role of providing, that in many ways often falls largely to men still. Of course, mom works all day too, and she comes home and gets dinner. So it can be difficult all around. But there is something still that distances men inherently and structurally in many, many cases. Through work structures, through distance, geographic distance of being in the military or having a job that involves heavy travel, as well as psychologically.
Mm-hmm. I just want to go back to the effect of the absent father for a minute, because we talked a little bit about how Paul Jung was kind of an absent father. I get the feeling, I'm sort of making this up.
Jung's father, right.
Yeah, Jung's father, a little depressive maybe.
Mhm.
He didn't feel that connected with his sense of vocation. His mother was kind of a character. But his father was a little bit of a failed man, and he died young too. So there's Jung, who's had this father wound of this, in some sense an absent father. And what does he do with it? Well, first he projects it. I make up that he probably projected on Bleuler first, but then certainly Freud. But really what he does with that wound is he essentially makes it the beating heart of his life's work. Not in a super explicit way. It's not like everything he did or whatever was about the father, but he was trying. I mean, his father had this wound around his spirituality. His father was a pastor who couldn't experience the numinous side of religion and wasn't sure what the heck he was doing. But Jung kind of makes it his life work to figure out what is this numinous experience and how can we reclaim it the way my father's way of doing it doesn't work anymore. How can we do it? And that's what Jung does. His whole life is to kind of solve his father's problem. And thank God he did, because he bequeathed all of this wisdom to us. So on the one hand, it was this like essential thing that happened to him, this wound that he received that enriched him. And at the same time, look what kind of father he was. His daughters didn't even realize that he was their father. And we know that he had his relational difficulties with women. Let's call his relationship with Emma incredibly productive on many levels. But, then there was Toni Wolff, and that caused people pain. So it's not a simple formula. A wound from an absent father might make certain aspects of your life more difficult, and it also might inject you with the question that will form your life's work.
Yeah. But I think you're really presenting something really important, which is the redemption and the opportunity, hopefully, that we have to use that wound for our own growth and development and contribution, not perfection, but can we use it? Can we notice it, embrace it, work on it, and do something with it? Nobody would ever recommend childhood trauma as somehow a worthy thing. But we all have some, even a lot. And the question is, can we put it to use? As Jung did. He wanted to solve that problem and many, many others by, kind of going into a spiritual world with his seances as a university student. But he was determined to find the something that his father didn't have. And in a way, we redeem our parents this way and contribute to the wholeness of the world and of ourselves by really facing and working on that wound.
And I like that we're kind of bringing it to a close there, Deb, because one of the feelings I did have as I prepped for this week's episode is just a little bit of caution around that narrative that, oh, I'm this way because my father wasn't around, which sort of is, okay, that's the end of the story, that's looking back at the wake of the boat, but this is Jung's sense of the kind of prospective approach, right? I mean, if you're a Freudian, you look back and what happened in the past that caused how you are now. And certainly that's an important question, but we're also interested in where is it going? And that's the perspective function. How can you work with it? What seed got planted in you when you were experiencing the pain and the anguish of the absent father? And what wants to come into the world through that wound in you? We want to invite reflection about this, but not the adoption of a sort of self-limiting narrative.
Oh, I like that very much.
Mm-hmm.
No self-limiting narratives, that we can move ahead. And there's nothing better to do.
Right, right. So today's dreamer is a 22-year-old man who's a university student studying psychology and philosophy, and he called his dream the death of God. And I want to say I was very moved by this dreamer and his circumstance, and it felt important to me that we talk about his dream. I walked up to an old Catholic cathedral with two other people, a couple, and one was named Trinity. Mass was going to begin soon, but we were just looking at the big front doors. There were two curved staircases leading up to the doors, above which were some stained glass windows. Between the staircases was an old fountain. By the door, there was a broken bell on the ground. I said we should ring that bell on the next big holiday. I believe I said Easter, but I'm not sure. There were two large volumes and some papers also near the door. The books were green. Trinity wanted to sharpen her pencil. There happened to be both a dispenser with old pencils and a pencil sharpener. When I tried to sharpen her pencil, it was sucked up by the sharpener. Then I tried to get her another from the dispenser. The first was too old and short, so I put it through the sharpener and it was eaten up. I then got a second one and I tried sharpening it without having it sucked up. I was only able to sharpen it a little bit. I looked down the steps and saw Trinity somehow stuck in a terrarium or aquarium filled with water. It floated into the air and she was trying to get out. Time kept ticking by and she became more frantic. For some reason, I grabbed the 2 green volumes and a large piece of parchment, but that didn't do anything. She eventually got out safely. Somehow the books ended up being in the fountain. Suddenly, there were a lot of people there, including a cardinal. The cardinal was walking up to the doors, and I hurried down. Parishioners noticed the books and tried to get them by using the hem of their shirts to paddle the water toward themselves. A priest with long, shaggy gray beard and hair yelled, "Why are you not wading into the water to save the precious words? Are your clothes more important than the word of God?" And here's the context. A few months ago, my older brother took his own life. He was my childhood hero, and much of what I did was an attempt to make him proud. My life reeled following his death. Meanwhile, my religious community, which is not Catholic, did not help. A few people texted after the incident, even though they all knew about it. Messages by church leaders and lessons taught by members felt hollow and trite. I've been struggling with my allegiance to the church ever since, despite my calling as a Sunday school teacher. Main feelings: there was a sense of panic as Trinity was drowning. There was also a profound annoyance with both the parishioners and the leaders. And he says the Catholic cathedral was located in the middle of the residential region in which I live, which is filled with Latter-day Saints, not Catholics. Other than that location, there were no other associations.
Well, I see why you chose this dream, coming as it does just a few months after this dreamer's brother took his life, and he hasn't had much support.
Right. And I feel like I want to say a little bit more. First of all, this is the kind of dream our psyche offers us when we're in despair or when we're in a state of confusion. Like, I think it's important to see that. And I also want to say that when I pick the dreams, I am very aware that for some dreamers, the issue that's being presented in the dream is very current. It's very immediate. And it feels important to me, not always, but sometimes, to be able to offer that dreamer something that I know that this dreamer will probably hear this dream in a few weeks, and maybe it will offer him something. Let's see what we can do with it. It's a confusing dream.
Yes. Yeah, I'm curious when you said a psyche will offer us a dream like this. So what category or general heading might you put on this kind of dream?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in a way it's a pretty deeply archetypal dream. It's a dream that really, and in a way that I don't know that I can or will be able to clearly articulate, but I think the dream does something. I think the dream really puts it out there what the central conflict is. Now, we might land on it and we might not, because it's a confusing I don't want to say confusing. It's a complex dream. But boy, this psyche is really delivering up some important images here. So let's just kind of walk through them one at a time and do what you'd like to do, Deb, which is just to kind of start right at the beginning. So I think, first of all, it's interesting that it's a Catholic cathedral, and we could think about, Catholicism and even the meaning of the word Catholic when it doesn't refer to the church, How do we define that word? It means
universal.
Yeah. There's 2 other people. So there is a trinity of people.
Yes.
There's a threesome, which, we might say in a Jungian sense, where's the 4th? 3 is a number of something moving toward wholeness, but it is also, of course, associated with the Trinity, which gets explicitly evoked because I guess I get the feeling that this is a couple, one's a man, one's a woman, don't know that for sure, and that the woman's name is Trinity.
Yep. That's exactly where I was. So Mass is going to begin, but they're outside just looking at big front doors. And then I thought this image of two staircases
Mm-hmm.
going up and around with an old fountain
Right.
in the middle.
It's a very visual image, right? And there's this kind of parallel structure.
Mhm. I don't know about you, but I thought about the very beginning of the Rosarium woodcuts.
Oh, yeah.
There are a series of woodcuts Jung was very interested in. And the very first image is that of a fountain, and it is bordered on either side, not by staircases, but with a border.
Mm-hmm.
That here is something that is supposed to be generative. A fountain is supposed to be active. It's there to circulate water. And it appears that that's not. Stained glass windows and a broken bell on the ground, which kind of emphasizes or reiterates the idea of something not working.
Wait, but is the fountain not working?
It says an old fountain.
But I think the fountain is, I don't know that the fountain's not working, but the bell is definitely broken.
Yes, but what I'm thinking is, said we should ring the bell on the next holiday, but if it's a broken bell, it won't ring. And where I went, which I don't claim is accurate, is that because of the broken bell, I think it's a doubling of a fountain that is not in good shape. I have a hunch that if it were working, I think we would know it. Again, hypothesis.
Okay. I didn't necessarily go there, and again, that would be something interesting to ask the dreamer.
I'm just thinking about just the situation of standing in front of two staircases, a fountain, and a broken bell.
Mm-hmm. Right. So just even the bell, right? You could amplify that. A bell has a feminine shape. A bell is to alert people. We ring a bell at times of trouble and celebration. There's a kind of universality of ringing the bell because everyone hears it from all around. So we're all having the same experience when the bell rings. I think it's interesting that he thought it might have been Easter. I want to say too that Mass is a sacrament, right? It's also a sacrifice because in a Catholic Mass you eat the body of Christ and you drink the blood of Christ. So there's a recapitulation of this sacrifice.
Here's a broken bell.
Mm-hmm.
Next, the big holiday, it might be Easter coming forward. But for me, the opening scene
Mm-hmm.
is a scene of things not working. He's not inside the church. And of course, this is reiterated by the fact that our dreamer has not felt supported by his religious community.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an outside image altogether. It's an outside image of not centered, not within the church. The bell doesn't ring.
And then, I think Deb, where you're going is perhaps underscored by the next scene, which has to do with the pencils. The pencil is not sharp, and every time he tries to get another pencil, it gets ground up. So there's so much here with this pencil thing. First of all, we can't not apply a little bit of a Freudian lens to it. Pencils are nice, phallic shaped. Yeah. And the idea of a pencil that keeps on getting ground up is perhaps an image of a feeling of impotence or being emasculated. I mean, he said his brother was his hero, and so something is not working. But he's also a student, and the pencil is a form of communication. It's something that we use to write our ideas down. It's a little bit associated, I think, with the air element, the thinking function. And so somehow his ability to express himself, to discern, to separate is getting ground down. It's getting eaten by the sharpener.
Yeah, I think that's all exactly right on. That to put a point on it, to sharpen a pencil, is to enhance its usefulness in order to literally make a point so that this is an ideal instrument. And instead, the pencil keeps getting ground down. But I want to go back to what happens prior to that, which is there are 2 large volumes and some papers near the door, and the books are green.
Mm-hmm.
So that's almost like a little sidebar of like, one would think this is 2 large volumes, and the books are green, often the color of growth. But Trinity wants to sharpen her pencil. She doesn't want to open the books. If this were a short story, we'd all be going, hey, wait a minute. Wait, what about the books?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll come back to them later in the dream. But something, and what's a book? Well, a book contains information. Might be a poem, might be some kind of scripture, might be short story, might be directions for how to do something. But books contain information, and instead of taking in, Trinity wants to put out by using a pencil. And once again, that doesn't work. So I think so far we have being outside the church, books not being opened, and a pencil that basically is destroyed. It was all eaten up, which is an interesting phrase.
So I want to do a little when then. So he does get the last pencil a little bit sharp. So I was only able to sharpen it a little bit. I looked down the steps and saw Trinity somehow stuck in a terrarium or aquarium filled with water. So if we do a when then, we say, when I get the pencil a little bit sharp, then Trinity is essentially drowning. And that's a really interesting image, that she's in a container filled with water and she can't get out and she's drowning. And what I'm wondering about is sort of thinking and feeling. So I was wondering a minute ago about the pencil as an image of the thinking function. And the dreamer is kind of focused on sharpening that. And so you could sort of say, when I focus on sharpening my thinking, my feminine, the anima, drowns. So what I might wonder about is, where is the feeling about his brother? And is it contained and yet so overwhelming that a part of him is drowning while he's off trying to sharpen his pencil, kind of focusing on his thinking function? So it might be an image, if you'll indulge me, it might be an image of a defense. I'm going to think about this a lot and I'm not going to feel. And then so a part of him, and a female in a man's dream might be an image of the anima, which is also associated with his feeling function. And the anima is trapped in a way that she's drowning in feeling. So I wonder what's going on with the feeling.
Yeah, and water is so often an image of that.
Mm-hmm.
So here she is in a container, and it can't be connected with, because she's floating up above in the air, and she's frantic. And so our dream ego grabs the 2 green volumes and a large piece of parchment, but that didn't do anything. And she eventually gets out.
I just want to say, there's 2 possible ways of looking at this. First of all, someone's drowning. You were sharpening your pencil and now she's drowning, so you grab the books. It sounds like more evidence for my possible hypothesis. There's too much thinking going on. Like, you think that thinking about it more, i.e. reading a book, is going to help, but it doesn't help. However, I'm going to contradict myself and say that the dream ego says it doesn't help, but somehow she does get out. So it might be, and it can be a both and. Dreams are very paradoxical. That somehow that might, in some ways, thinking about it more might in some ways be the wrong impulse, but in another way, it might be what leads you through.
Yeah. And I'm seeing the two green volumes in parchment as, another image of the thinking function. I'll open a book, I'll read the directions, I'll learn something.
And then the books wind up in the fountain and they're wet. So there is water in the fountain.
I stand corrected. There is water in the fountain. And when that happens, another when then,
Yeah.
when the books are in the fountain, a lot of people are there, including a cardinal. He's walking up to the doors. I hurried down. Parishioners noticed the books, tried to grab them by using the hem of their shirts to paddle the water toward themselves. Okay, so I get that we kind of churn the water to create kind of a little tide. And the priest with long, shaggy gray beard and hair scolds them. Why are you not wading into the water to save the precious word? Are your clothes more important than the word of God?
Okay, I'm having a thought.
Okay.
So first, the water. There's water in the fountain, and of course, the fountain can be an image for regeneration and renewal. Because if the fountain's working, the water is kind of eternally cycling through, right? But then we get this water in this like weird aquarium terrarium thing that's potentially going to drown somebody, and also is floating up in the air, which is not what a big container of water would do. So that's interesting too, right? Because it's almost like the feeling is not grounded. But then our attention is turned to the fountain. And that is a more natural place for water to be. And by the way, fountains existed in towns in the Middle Ages and later as sources of drinking water, or where you would bring your livestock to drink. So, I mean, if you go to Rome, you see all these beautiful fountains, which were obviously works of art, but they had this practical application that this is where you would go to get water. So very, very important. And now the books are going in the fountain. And if we think about the books again, Deb, as you and I were saying, like kind of the thinking function, this feels a little bit better to me that the thinking function's now gotten wet, which maybe is kind of what needs to happen. What do you think of that?
I hear that there is a contact, a submersion, that thinking is now subordinate.
Yeah.
The dry books of knowledge and all kinds of words, like we know from every textbook, has been submerged in the water, which that is not the appropriate treatment of books, but at least the trajectory of the dream has swung to the other side. Rather than having this aquarium high up in the air where nobody can reach it, it's now gone the other way, and the books have been dunked in the water in the fountain, where they're unreadable, unusable. But it's a polarity here that has occurred. And then we have the dream image of this cardinal.
Yes.
Who is, first of all, he's old.
Well, wait, there's a cardinal and then this is a priest. So I think are they two? Are they separate?
Oh, the cardinal's walking to the doors. Oh, no, they're different. A priest with long, shaggy gray beard and hair. So here we have a sort of a Senex image. The old man who stands for law and order and tradition and doing things, quote, right, unquote.
Mm-hmm. Which might be an image of kind of the church, and the priest is kind of perhaps incorrectly valuing the books over the parishioners. The parishioners are sort of taking an intermediary step. They're not just letting the books float there. They're trying to get them. But I also I want to explore whether or not we can imagine that the priest might be right. And I want to go back to your very excellent exposition about this kind of polarity. Like, it's not right that the books are in the fountain, but it may be better than that they're sort of dry and the water's floating up above you. But maybe now what's needed is a new synthesis where the dreamer or the parishioners go into the water and get the books.
This is the puzzling part of the dream for me,
Mm-hmm.
where we really need the dreamer,
Yeah.
because there can be the another polarity. Our dreamer was not well treated by his religious community.
Mm-hmm.
The word can be dry and doctrinaire and rules and regs, and this is the way you do it. And there's also a possibility that this priest could be a wise man, an old wise man,
Right.
who is saying, look to the spiritual meaning of the word. Get in the water,
Yes.
get wet in the feeling function, and retrieve something of supreme importance that is simply symbolized by the books. You have access to an archetypal transcendence, but first you have to get in the water of feeling to be able to find it.
Yep. I like that a lot, Deb.
Both of those things can be true. And it could be that in his religious experience following his brother's death, his local religious community's lack of support and empathy and caring and love has resulted in distancing him from a supraordinate reality, the self, something greater than people and an individual church here on earth. So both of those things, and probably more, can be true.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. And I think it's maybe significant that it might be Easter, because that is the moment of rebirth. So I don't think I could say it better. I really like your thought that he has to kind of go into the water, which of course is actually an image of baptism as well. To go into the water and then find the living water, the living word, not the dry dogmatic doctrine, but the word that is infused with the living water.
Yeah. I'm very touched by the dream and the dreamer's situation. And I'm hoping that this young man, has some sources of human support. His psyche is looking ahead and pointing toward how to resolve this conflict.
And there is inner support, right? The psyche is showing up, and I hope that our discussion today has also provided some support. Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.